Hi folks, welcome to ScholarBot Tarot. Just call me Mayfield, and thanks a ton for stopping by the study space. Today we're going to be doing a super fun hashtag called Books for the Major Arcana, where I'm going to pair a book of my choosing with a Major Arcana and just kind of see how they connect, how well they connect, or just how they resemble one another. This hashtag was started by Lennon Smith about 2 months ago, and I actually first learned about it through Aquamarine 18 Books in Tarot. And so I'm super excited about this. I even wrote it in Laura's video where I'm like, oh, this tag is dangerous. And lo and behold, this was a whole ride. So let's go ahead and get started. But first, just a quick little disclaimer. I'm actually going to follow Laura's lead and keep books off of my timestamps to avoid spoilers, I guess. But I have included the book's ISBN numbers in their place if you find any of them interesting enough to look into them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so we're at our first entry and we already have a tie, yay! So when I saw Laura do this VR, my gut reaction for the Fool was Voltaire's Candide. I don't own Candide anymore, so just humor me for a second, because I had to read Candide like 3 times when I was in community college for different classes. Candide is a satire, a response to the philosopher Leibniz's half-assed answer to the problem of evil. God can be all-powerful, all-benevolent, and all-knowing because he carefully selected this current timeline that we live in as the best of all possible worlds. So then Voltaire proceeds to personify this philosophy in the character Candide, the most obnoxiously optimistic character that reiterates that this is the best of all possible worlds after near cataclysmic and horrific events that transpire among him and his traveling companions. He is the Fool on the basis of diving right in and, I guess, sort of getting back up. Just to sort of abide by the rules, however, if Candide didn't give me such a visceral reaction, I would have selected Racial Innocence by Robin Bernstein. It's an academic text that explores how innocence is constructed and performed to maintain a structure of white supremacy. Think of the children. For the Magician, I honestly settled for The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish. I feel like this was an okay start to understanding basic occult knowledge. I wouldn't say that this is foundational, but as I like to interpret in The Magician, something's better than nothing. There's a lot of as above, so below phrasing in here as well. Alrighty, so for the High Priestess, I really wanted to include something truly intuitive. So I selected Martin Buber's I and Thou. This is not an actual copy of I and Thou because my copy is on my Kindle app, and that's currently, my script that's behind the camera. But this does work as a decent placeholder because it's by the same guy. Anyways, I read this book in a philosophy of religion class. It was the only book we read, and it was a struggle for all of us to understand, including our professor. Although it's a philosophical text, it's written like poetry, and the concept of an I-thou moment isn't necessarily something you're meant to describe. Supposedly, an I-thou moment is an unspoken dialogue between you and a higher power. Often when you have an unspeakable encounter with a person, a place, a thing, any noun, it's something you can only feel in that moment. Outside of that moment, when you try to describe it, it is no longer an I-thou moment. And no, it is not necessarily a feeling of love either. In my opinion, it is the most secular and accessible experience of the divine that I truly value. your experience with others can sometimes be this reflection on your relationship with higher power or yourself. And that's why I selected it as the High Priestess. Ta-chan from The Way of the House Husband is my Empress. This manga is about a former Yakuza who becomes a house husband, supporting his wife and others. He still has many of his stereotypical Yakuza quirks and mores, which makes it super comedic, but I appreciate that Ta-chan can still be himself while nurturing his neighbors, former associates, and even enemies in his new role that he absolutely excels in. I don't know if you can see this very well, but here's a manga panel of him cooking his wife's lunch and then taking pictures of it. So I'm still in the process of reading this. This is Privilege of Play by Aaron Trammell. I think this is actually relatively new. So far, from what I can tell, it does have like some Emperor energy in terms of agency or seeming lack thereof. One of the arguments made in this text is that white men in hobby spaces, specifically tabletop games, video games, and other niche hobbies, benefit from the privilege of being a blank slate demographic. But when folks of color or women enter those spaces, they lead with their perceived isolation to prove how marginalized they are as a community. They're at the top, but they don't acknowledge that privilege or status because of their personal experiences, yet claim that being a real gamer, yet they'll claim like they're a real gamer when it's like convenient to them, you know? But yeah, this is my Emperor spot. I might actually use this in a future video one of these days, because I do think that it's sort of relevant to tarot, but this is another time. The next one I have is kind of a weird one. For the Hierophant, I picked The Secret History of the World. I don't know why I picked this one. I think it's just because of like that secret history. To me, the Hierophant always means, I understand that it means like orthodoxy, tradition. It's basically everybody's like least favorite card. But I also feel like there's this air of mystery to him. Like he knows something that we don't, and not in like a good way or an intuitive way like the High Priestess does. Almost like he's hiding something. And while I'm absolutely not like a conspiracy theory person, this was back when I was like interested in conspiracy theories as a concept, not a thing to believe in. But yeah, I basically picked this because it can tell us the tradition and orthodoxy, or orthodox history, can still be wrong, but entertaining. So yeah, if you don't like the Hierophant, the least we can do is have fun with him. For the lovers, originally Boober's I and Thou was in this spot, but I found something way better. Ugh, it's at the very corner. Give me a second. Okay. So this is a novel by former YouTuber Lindsay Ellis, one of my favorite video essayists on media and pop culture. But this is actually a sci-fi novel called Axiom's End. And it's about a young woman who encounters an extraterrestrial and has to navigate the government and her conspiracy theorist father while being this alien's translator. The novel deals with a lot of understanding and synchronizing with someone or something that isn't easily understood, which is how I generally read The Lovers. How synchronized I am with myself or with someone else. I feel like Transformers meets Twilight. Highly recommend. The Chariot was a difficult one for me. It was actually kind of also a tie between two, well, instead of like a novel and like, whatchamacallit, an academic text, it was actually two academic texts that made the spot. So that would be, oh, that's the wrong one. That's for later. Here we go. So we've got Race After Technology by Ruha Benjamin. And we also have, where did it go? Here There we go. It was on the same side. We also have Intersectional Tech, Black Users in Digital Gaming by Kishana Gray. Now, both of these academic texts are in some ways about how technology doesn't take into account people of color, specifically melanated people or Black people. And I just find these to have this sort of Chariot energy because I feel like the Chariots are in front of the horses or the Sphinxes or whatever you want to call them. Specifically with like race after technology, I mean, it's kind of in the name. We have all of these technological advances to be able to green our faces or do like the fingerprints to open our phones with intersectional tech. We have we just have a lot of like racism in gaming, specifically in multiplayer gaming. And it's just so interesting that there's this idea that we are so technologically advanced and yet we don't take into account that Black faces sometimes can't really be seen on camera, depending on how old your camera is, or even if it is like up to date, like you can't face lock it. I'm sorry, I'm just going in like so many different directions. Intersectional tech and race after technology, those are my chariots. And I hope at some point we will actually be able to steer in the correct direction. While I'm putting this back, I can actually pull out Strength book. This is Steel Driving Man, John Henry, by Scott Reynolds Nelson. So Steel Driving Man is about the legend of John Henry, a total strength card type, although you've probably actually seen him being depicted as the Seven of Wands in Tarot of the Divine. This text attempts to find the historical John Henry and then proceeds to trace how the legend is interpreted, retold, and changed over time. While I don't recall that he found John Henry, he did specify that the legend most likely originated as like a convict leased worker. John Henry wasn't a laborer. He would have most likely been like a prisoner. I know there's like that line in the legend where it says that he was buried under the White House after he died. But that actually, the White House actually supposedly refers to being buried under a penitentiary, which was devastating for me to learn. Oh, why did I select this book as Strength? So, as I mentioned, Steel Driving Man explores all the ways that the legend of John Henry is interpreted. And my favorite depiction of strength is usually when the woman and the beast are an amalgamation. John Henry takes shape as both an object to be tamed, which there can be like a whole discourse about that, but also as an agent as well. I mean, we see him as this mythological figure or this legendary figure, but I mean, we also make use of him in whatever era we might be. And I just think that's absolutely fascinating. So for the Hermit, I don't have the series in front of me because it's in my closet and it's a very big box set. Yes, I'm using a box set for the Hermit, and it is The Trials of Apollo by Rick Riordan. So yeah, the whole series is The Hermit. In this young adult novel, Apollo is punished by Zeus to become human and has to navigate his mortal life as a nerdy, clumsy teenager. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but the ending especially totally involves like a very Hermit-like scene that left an incredible impact on me. And just so you're aware, if you are interested in reading The Trials of Apollo, it technically is the third series of the entire Percy Jackson, like, the entire, like, Rick Riordan, like, world-building mythology. It's super good, and if you're struggling to get into reading, there is never any shame in starting with, like, basically kids' books. They're really good. Okay. So for Wheel of Fortune, we've actually talked about this book quite a few times on this channel. And that would be Ghostly Matters by Avery Gordon. Sorry, the light is bad. I selected this as my Wheel of Fortune because of how it encourages the method of just finding answers from the absence of answers or the context of the question. And personally, I think that leaves behind many possibilities that one wouldn't have normally imagined. And that's kind of how I read the Wheel of Fortune. Justice. Justice was actually a really hard book for me to find because, I mean, obviously I would probably go for some sort of academic text, but it's kind of academic text heavy, so I wanted to include something fun. So, Gears of War, the slab, I don't have the book cover on it, so you could just look at the mirrored version of the spine here. But this is a prequel novel for one of my favorite video game series, Gears of War. I guess we can technically call it a sci-fi series because the narrative takes place on a war-torn planet called Sarah. The humanoid enemy in the game, called locusts, emerge from the underground and they kill everything and everyone in their path to take over the outside. It's up to the cog and the gears, which is basically Sarah's like government, to fight for their society. That's noble, right? No, there is no justice in this book. Our main character Marcus is like locked up for like deserting his post to save his father. His best friend Dom has lost his children and his wife, and she like vanishes in a grief-stricken state. And Marcus's scientist father, who we thought was killed, no, he was actually kidnapped by the government alongside several other scientists in high society to live on a secured colony. Fuck this book. Alright, I'm sorry. Hey, look, it's another one of Lindsay Ellis's book. This is Truth the Divine, and it's in my Hanged Man spot. This is the sequel to Axiom's End, and I selected this novel for The Hanged Man because everything feels like it's sort of in limbo, and not in a good way. There are so many ways that I read the Hanged Man: suspension, near death or near drastic change, sacrifice, dead time. Many of the plot points adhere to the different ways that I read this card. I think one of the biggest ways that I really appreciated this book is that there's just a lot of things that are in limbo. And I can't wait to read the third one when it comes out. So for death, I picked Japanese death poems. This is written by Zen monks and the haiku poets on the verge of death. And technically I did wonder if Japanese death poems would have made maybe a better selection for the Hanged Man, but I thought this would be obvious and, you know, literal within the context of the death card. Alright, so this one is by Masahide. He died on the 3rd day of the 8th month, 1723, at the age of 67. And just by like a quick little glance, it looked like he was like super poor and his house like burnt down. But the poem that he wrote, it's a haiku. While I walk on, the moon keeps pace beside me, friend in the water. Okay, so for Temperance, that's not Temperance. This is Temperance. Okay, so I don't have the sleeve again, but that's fine. This is Minding the Machine, Languages of Class in Early Industrial America by, I think his name is Stephen Rice. Stephen Rice, I remember. So Minding the Machine is another academic text that I read in the grad school. It explores the role of the manager and low-key, like, the death of artisanry in favor of mass production. The manager is the head of the company, making all of the decisions on behalf of their employees, and the workers are the hand, the ones who do as the manager instructs and assembles the product. So the author discusses how companies and manufacturers justified having management in this way that it is supposed to temper production. But we know that's not how that really works, right? Okay, for the devil, someone else already picked Paradise Lost. Not that I had that in my collection anyways. But the devil, oh, this is not my pick. This wouldn't have been a bad pick for the devil, by the way. Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. But this was not my pick. Give me a second. We'll call that a honorable mention. My pick was Faust by, I'm not going to bother pronouncing that. So this is the origin of the Faustian bargain. When we ask for a favor or wish from the Mephistopheles, we find ourselves chained to the despair that inevitably bounds us. God, I know I just skipped through that sentence, but we're going with it. I will also say that if I did have a copy of this, I probably would have had Madoka Magica in this spot. And if you don't know what Madoka Magica is, watch it. I recommend it. Total devil energy once you get past, like, the 3rd episode. Things get metal real quick. Alright, so for the tower, what did I decide to do? Oh, yes, for the tower. Let's see here. Here we go. So this is my tower. This is Popular Culture in the Age of White Flight by Eric Avila. And this is another one of my favorite texts. The Age of White Flight is in my tower spot because it recounts the destruction of many lived spaces in favor of suburban living. White Flight, by the way, is the migration of white Americans who fled to the suburbs during deindustrialization of the 50s and 60s. Not only were they, looking for jobs, they were also fleeing from racial integration that just rippled after the decision of Brownview Board of Education. The chapters in this book, I will admit, are quite fragmented, but I mean, I think that works pretty well because it's about different parts of like LA and just how they were suburbanized, for lack of a better term. They deal with different aspects of specifically Southern California, the destruction of accessible streetcars in favor of freeways that hid blighted neighborhoods, the destruction of the Chavez Ravine that displaced countless Latine families for the Dodger Stadium parking lot, and even a fun little chapter on how Disneyland was structured to be this orderly, homogeneous space that juxtaposed those dirty, integrated carnivals like Coney Island. That was sarcasm, by the way. But yes, this is my tower. And I hope you agree that this is a good tower pick. The star, I decided on this one. This is American Technological Sublime by David Nye, the Sublime guy. And this book is essentially about how the concept of what it means to experience the sublime in America went from natural environments to technological advancements, ranging from the stuff from the Chicago's World Fair to space travel to nuke. So yeah, we're just watching in awe as the shooting stars come eerily closer. They are the guiding light. So the next one I have this is going to be for the moon. Alrighty. So this is actually going to be another text that I use for a future video. But this is the Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. And the Dark Fantastic is about how we tend to feel this subconscious disruption whenever we view media that includes people of color, namely African Americans. So think about like how you may have felt when you learned that Ariel was going to be played by a black actress, or when it was revealed that Rue from Hunger Games was always black. Think about whenever you see a tarot deck with a historical feel to it that had a melanated person occupying that space, even though they have every right and reason to be there. The disruption you feel is explored in this book, in the context of pop culture. But it's very relevant here in the tarot community, as well as in my moon slot. And for the sun, we've got Basic Writings of Existentialism. This is edited by Gordon Marino. I just really wanted to include existentialism in the Sunspot, mainly as like a nod to the Philosopher's Tarot, which depicts Friedrich Nietzsche as the sun. At first glance, with the stereotypes of edgy high school teenagers claiming that God is dead, existentialism may seem quite drastic and bleak. After all, humans were condemned to be free. But we see and act authentically and clearly when we recognize there are no values that can fog our senses. It's up to us to create our own values. And I think that aspect of clarity is a perfect, just a perfect way for me to read the sun, just because it's a lot easier than me to think about, like, you know, happiness or something like that. Not think about it, but there are so many cards that I feel like are happy cards, and to incorporate clarity into this description makes it a lot easier for me to assign something to it. For judgments, we have The Battle for Christmas by Steven Nissenbaum. Okay, remember when I said all of the other academic texts were my favorite? I lied. This one is my favorite. Nissenbaum made learning about Christmas so much fun and infuriating. This is basically the story of how Christmas went from an outlawed pagan holiday to an American holiday full of mass-produced gift-giving, and just basically how Christmas was raised from the dead. Would you believe me if I told you that the first mass-produced gifts were gift Bibles? Turns out all you gotta do is tack on some Christianity to cleanse the heathen. But yes, I assign this book to judgment because it's basically breathing in this new life and making this drastic shift of a holiday to the point where it was no longer outlawed, and in fact it's one of the most important holidays that we have in the Western world, whatever that means. Finally, we've gotten to the world. And for this selection, I picked the novel. Oh, where is the novel? The novel was right behind me. It is World War Z by Max Brooks. And it's not because world is in the title either. Mainly because of how it's written. Have you seen the movie World War Z? You know, the film adaptation of it? No? Great. Don't. Read the book, because it's written like a documentary. Like, each chapter is from, I was gonna say from like a different person's perspective, but no, it's a different person that the narrator is interviewing about their experiences in the zombie uprising. And unlike the film, which looks like a standard basic zombie movie, the book takes place after the zombies came and went. It's the afterwards that makes me assign this book for the world slot. We've had an enormous journey of pure zombie and global nonsense that we're learning in retrospect. And now the cycle has ended and life continues on a new journey. So what did I learn? Well, I definitely have more academic texts than I do have novels. Unless I count like the entirety of like Rick Riordan's series. But those are in another room. I think this is a great exercise to be able to honor the books that you do have on your shelf, because at first, like, I always thought that I was the kind of person who just collected books and didn't actually read them. But I've read most of these things that are in my collection, and I don't know, I guess I'm a better reader than I gave myself credit for, because I could actually like sort of summarize most of these entries for you guys, and that made me feel very good about myself. Again, I highly recommend most of these, although I will give you a fair warning that some of the academic texts are, some of them are great, like Battle for Christmas, so wonderfully written because the guy was like near the end of his career and he was like ready to retire, so he could afford to be silly with it. That one was fun. Although I would maybe say that like Minding the Machine is a little dry. I hope you pick any of these some of these books up and let me know what you think. And if you want to do this tag, absolutely take a crack at it. It's a lot of fun. Um, if you're a chronic library user like I am, I would maybe recommend like, I don't know, having like a picture or a link to the book that you're referencing, because I did get stuck a couple times for some of these because I'm like, oh no, I don't have that book in my collection. I rented that. Those were my selections. I thought this tag was super duper dangerous and overwhelming at first, but it turns out I was able to find an entry for each card. Maybe you can too. I have linked Laura's video in the description as well as Lennon Smith's video. So go check that out if you're looking for some more book recommendations. Don't forget to leave a like, and if you decide to comment, let's pledge to make discourse, not war. Until next time, folks. See ya.